So we're going to get going here. And today, and I should say, I'm Karen Walker. I'm Associate Director of Competitive Intelligence at the University of South Florida. And my co-presenter today is Alba McIntyre. She's a policy and planning analyst at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we're going to talk about managing CI projects. And what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about CI. I'm going to talk about the process, and I'll walk through a case study. And then Alba is going to talk about those management strategies, what you do when maybe you have some setbacks or some issues, and she'll work through that. So what is competitive intelligence? Okay, and I've got a definition here on the left-hand side. This is kind of an abbreviated version of a definition that Alba and I have arrived at, and will be in a paper that will be in the Nordup Journal, hopefully coming out soon. But we arrived at this after going through a lot of different publications and looking at a lot of different definitions, because if you go out to the literature, there's no one definition, and most of the definitions are focused on industry. So we wanted to come up with a definition that's really suitable for what we're doing in research development in the research office. And what you'll notice about this is we're really focused on providing actionable insights or actionable intelligence for our stakeholders. So we wanted to get away from all of the data dumps, the big Excel files, and really focus on, going out, getting information, contextualizing it, and then providing recommendations or key findings for our stakeholders, doing that footwork for them. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, what you see here is taken from the strategic and competitive intelligence professionals fundamental training. And so this is essentially what they call the 5 pillars of a competitive intelligence. And when I say competitive intelligence, you can also think strategic intelligence. I know those terms are used kind of interchangeably across universities. These are the 5 pillars of a CI function or organization. And so what we mean by 5 pillars is these should be in place to really have a good working structure. And so you want your CI function to be strategic. So that means you want it to align with your organizational goals. You want to be unbiased. That means you want to approach all of your efforts, objectively. Everything should be measurable in some way so that your stakeholder, is getting efforts that are approached in an objective manner. I'm sorry, I was I'm off track here. Measurable. You want things to be measurable so that your stakeholder can make value judgments on things. You want things to be actionable, right? So we just talked about that a second ago. They need to make decisions. So what are you giving them that allows them to make those decisions? How can they act on it? And then finally, you want to have a process in place that is repeatable, so that you're not constantly reinventing the wheel. And this allows you to be more efficient and to have something that you can rely on. And that's what I'm going to really focus on here when I talk about process. But before we dip right into the process, I want to talk a little bit about what we focus on within the research office. And most of us here, I would say most of us, are really focused in either a central research office or maybe a unit research office. I know there are a few people not in those areas, but they're probably adjacent to that. And so there are these 3 domains that we have to have some understanding of. There are the sponsors who supply the funding that we're looking for, because funding kind of drives everything. There's our competitors, who are other universities who are going after the same funding that we are. And then there's our home institution and our internal capabilities, which we have to understand. And so by understanding these 3 domains, we can align our strengths with sponsor funding priorities, and then determine how to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. And so I should also say that those competitors can sometimes become collaborators and fill gaps in areas where we're not strong. So you might be asking, you know, when do we need to use a process, or why would we apply a process? Well, typically the kinds of questions that are brought to people doing um, competitive intelligence are questions that really require like in-depth analysis and not just data. And it's possible you may be asked sometimes to just deliver data or information. I think it's not impossible or infrequent that we get requests where we're asked, can you find, what institutions won such and such award this last cycle? And that's really just a request for information. Although I would say a lot of times I try to add a little bit more to what they're asking, just to show them that, hey, you could be thinking about this in different ways. But when we're talking about CI and the types of things that we're providing, we're usually looking at questions that may have multiple issues involved, multiple components involved that we have to look at. We're pulling data not just from one source, but multiple sources. So these are complicated issues that are not easily arrived at. The answers are not easily arrived at by just looking at a single source. And we're also asked many times to make some sort of assessment, to give some sort of answer based on doing some sort of deep analysis of all these different sources. Why you want to apply a process is because it's going to save you time to have some sort of reproducible process that you can move much more quickly if you can just jump into a process and you don't have to develop a process, time and again. And you have a structure that makes sense and that you can explain to people. So when you sit down with that stakeholder, you can tell them exactly what your workflow is going to be, and hopefully you can also distill some confidence in them. Now, when we talk about the competitive intelligence process, which is also referred to as the CI life cycle by some people, I have settled on a 5-step process, and this is what I've used in my work or what I've used when I've worked with teams. But you may talk to other people and they may have a 4-step process, or they may have an 8-step process. I've seen it, you know, condensed and expanded, but essentially you'll see the same sorts of steps whenever you ask CI practitioners what they do. Some people just put steps together, or they expand steps and make them longer. And these are the basic processes that people complete to do CI work. And so I'm not going to talk about these on this slide because we're going to talk about each step in this process in depth here. The planning step is the first step, and it's really the most critical step of the entire process because it sets you up for success. I know a lot of times when we get asked to do a task, the impulse is to jump right away into collecting data, but that can really mess you up in the long run, because what you need to do is really understand what it is you're trying to solve for a person. So my recommendation is to always have a planning step where you are sitting down with your stakeholder. I know this can be difficult sometimes if the person is high up in the chain and they don't have a lot of time to meet with you, but sit down with somebody who can answer some questions for you. Typically, I have a checklist of standard questions that I work from, and then in the course of talking to the individual, usually other questions will arise. But there are certain things you really need to determine, like the motivation for the request. Why are they meeting with you to ask for help? What sort of thing is happening right now? They might be submitting a proposal, but it could be other things that are happening. Are they meeting with a state senator and they need to be able to talk to them about things that are going on with our research? So they need something from you. Are they planning to set up some sort of interdisciplinary initiative? There's all sorts of things that can motivate a request, and a lot of times different motivations will drive your work in different directions. So understanding that is important. Defining the key question is critical. So what is it that they need to have answered? You might make an assumption and you might be wrong. Sometimes it seems clear if they're asking you for an analysis of a funding program, you might think, well, they just need to know how they can be successful with this program. But there's been plenty of times that I've met with faculty when they're interested in a program, and it turns out they just want to know one thing about that program. Maybe they've applied to it before and they haven't been successful. And so maybe there's a certain aspect of it. I've had faculty say, I don't know what types of partners I should have for this program. Do I need to have a federal lab? Do I need to have industry? What should I be looking for? How many partners do I need to have? Or if they're building a team internally, who do I need to have on the team? There's all sorts of questions that they may have about a program. Or, if you're doing other work, it could be looking at, hiring or building some sort of internal initiative. Your stakeholder is going to have questions, and it's really up to you to work with them and find out what those questions are. But you also want to make sure they don't have too many questions, because that expands your scope. And Alba will be talking about that in her part. It's also important to understand what their previous efforts have been related to the work they're asking you to do. If they did submit a proposal and they didn't get the award, can you maybe look at it and see what kind of feedback they got? Or, has somebody else done some work for them? If you don't have to start from ground zero, that's great. So find out what other efforts have been done. Beyond the initial stakeholder, are there other people that could be stakeholders or other people they're working with that will need to see your final product, and find out who they are so you understand who all is going to see this and what questions they might have or what things they might focus on. Very significant to manage expectations. You want to make sure you're on the same wavelength. So you don't want to overpromise and underproduce. And you want to make sure they understand what you can get done in a certain time frame. If they're wanting something in a week, maybe you can only produce, so much. But if they're wanting something in a month, then you can give them, a little bit more. So make sure that you're both on the same wavelength about what can be produced so that everybody's happy at the end. And then finally, make sure that you understand how they like to receive information. Most people would be happy with some sort of written report. They may want to see some data files. I've had people where they want PowerPoints and they just want high level, facts delivered to them. You just need to clarify with them, what their preference is so that you know what you need to deliver. Now, the collection phase, this is where we're going to start pulling in data and information. But before you do that, I always like to get a basic understanding of the topic. We work with a lot of different people. I've worked with faculty in engineering, the humanities, everywhere. And, I'm not a subject matter expert. None of us usually are. Some of you may be, but a lot of us aren't. So it's important to understand the topic. So if somebody comes to me and they're working in something like the blue economy, I want to read up on that. I want to understand the issues in that. I want to understand what's going on. And you won't become an expert, but at least you can read enough so that you'll be able to determine, what's good resources for me to go out to. What should I be pulling? What sort of information? And when you decide to go out and get information, it can also be helpful in that initial conversation to ask your stakeholder, hey, what's some good resources for me to look at? Also, what people could you talk to? You have subject matter experts at your institution. So who should you be talking to help you learn about this topic and to pull some information and get some ideas? You want to look at, if you're doing like a program analysis, obviously you're going to go to the sponsor site, you're going to maybe pull data if it's available. So there's a lot of different resources you can look at. I'm not going to go into any specifics about data handling and collection. I will point out that back in May, we had a really great presentation by Ryan, Alba, and Sabrina on different data sources. So you should check that out. I'm happy to share the web links on that. Throughout this process, you want to keep that key question in mind, because it is so easy for all of us who like to look at data and information. It's so easy to go down the rabbit hole and go this direction and that direction, and this looks interesting. But is it answering the question for your stakeholder? So you want to stay focused on that. And the same thing with your analysis. You want to make sure you're focusing on your key question as you look through all of the data and start trying to elucidate different trends and patterns that you're seeing. And you also want to remain objective. You don't want to start forcing some sort of idea. Maybe that your stakeholder has some idea, and that's great, but you want to just look at what the data is telling you and not force any kind of preconceived notions on it. And also, as you're looking at the data, as you're figuring out the trends and things, you want to be cognizant of what you're not seeing. If you were doing a program analysis, again, you might be seeing certain types of research showing up, and maybe the type of research that your faculty member is doing is not showing up. So what does that tell you? Does it tell you that they're ahead of the trends, or does it show you that that's an area that maybe is not getting enough attention, or is it an area that the sponsor does not want to fund? You'll have to figure that out as you look at that. I'm pretty agnostic about tools. I know that everybody has different tools at different universities. There's a lot of different subscription tools that you can look at. For the most part, I will say that they tend to do about the same thing. There's differences, but they're all helpful. And of course, there's a lot of publicly available tools that you can look at that will help you with your analysis. I would also be mindful of different methodologies that will help you with your critical thinking as you examine the data. I think the most helpful thing is really to sit and talk with another analyst, or at least somebody on your team who has some awareness of what you're doing, just to make sure that as you're doing your analysis, again, you're being objective. You're not maybe running down the wrong path. Doing some brainstorming techniques with them could be really helpful as you try to figure out what's going on here. Now, the transformation step is really where you start to do your work as a CI analyst and start finding those recommendations and key findings for your client. The number one most useful hint I can give you is put those key findings up front in your document, your email, whatever it is you're sending them, because unfortunately people don't read. And if you wind up doing it, like an academic paper, and you put your conclusions at the end, they may never see them. So unfortunately, you want to make sure you have maybe like an executive summary or something where you put those key findings up front. So if nothing else, they will read that. And, there's a lot of different ways that you can get information across to people. Again, understanding their communication style is really important. You want to have very precise and concise language. Visualizations can help to illustrate different things that you found as far as connections and patterns. You want to communicate, those obvious findings. Some of them may be more like observations maybe than actual recommendations, but you also want to provide what I call informed speculation. So, you want to take those trends that you see and not be worried or afraid about maybe doing some extrapolation. I know sometimes people are a little concerned because they say, well, we're not subject matter experts, but you've done all this work. You've pulled together all of this information about a topic from multiple resources. You understand what your stakeholder wants. You understand your university and the funders. You may be the only person who is looking at this particular subject this way. So I think you have to give yourself credit that you may be seeing something in this information that no one else is seeing. And I know sometimes people just don't have that confidence, especially early on in their CI career, to put in some findings or recommendations. But I really think it's critical that you do that, and you don't know how much you may be helping your client by pointing something out that nobody else has seen. So please have that confidence to do that. Finally, you want to disseminate your information. Now, typically, it may be through email that you're going to share this with your stakeholder. It may be in Dropbox. Maybe you're putting something in a shared space that they'll access. But just make sure that they have easy access to it and can find it. And the same thing with the other stakeholders you may have identified. Make sure that they're able to access it. And one thing I want to point out is that as you produce more of these documents and reports, you're going to want to figure out not only how you're going to store and maintain them, but how you may update things. Some of these things may be cyclical and you may want to update them. So, how do you do that? How do you remind yourself? Do you put together a schedule? This is something you'll have to think about as you continue down this path. So I want to show you a little case study just so you can see how the process works and what the outcomes are of it. This is based on a water center landscape I did in I think it was my second year of doing CI. And this may have been the first landscape study that I did. I think it is actually. This is when I was back at Arizona State University. And our leadership felt strongly that we should have some sort of water center or initiative, and that, of course, we should be a leader in water, water research, water policy. And so I had done a project for them before this where I identified all of the faculty that I could find who did any sort of research in water. And so these were folks all the way from engineering to life sciences, policy, humanities. So this was over 80 people. And so the second stage was going out and figuring out what was going on at other universities in water centers. And I worked with the person they had identified as the leader of this effort. And so I sat down with them and talked with them about what they wanted to see. And then I moved on to doing this data collection. And I went out and identified different resources that I could use. And one of these was this Water Resources Research Institutes. These were centers, federally funded centers, one in each state. And it was through the U.S. Geological Survey, kind of unusual. But these were kind of high-level institutes. And then I just looked at other large federal awards funding water centers or related awards. I went through publications to see who was active in this area, and then I looked at university websites. I also found out that we had a regional water center about 10 years prior that had brought the 3 Arizona State universities together. So I went and interviewed some of the PIs for that. For my analysis, I looked at about 30 existing water centers, just pulling together some of their kind of high-level characteristics and looking at those and comparing them. And then I pulled 5 of those centers out to be exemplars for us. And so really going into detail about their funding, the people. I talked to some of the people, so getting a lot of information on them. I also tried to determine why the previous regional water center failed. And after talking to folks there, it turned out that they weren't aligned in their goals. It was like every PI was out doing something completely different. So there was no unity within the center, and there wasn't enough initial funding for the center. They kind of got some dribs and drabs from the state, but really no big money. So I performed a SWOT analysis for this, looking at ASU's capabilities and then kind of looking at what some of the roadblocks would be. When I did my transformation step, again, this was early on, so I didn't have really strong recommendations, but what I did tell them was they had to have a really clear vision, and they couldn't have just a desert focus, because some of the leadership had really been pushing for a desert water center, saying, hey, we're a water center in the desert. This is really cool. And what I had found was there were a bunch of southwestern centers that were focused on the desert. So I knew, maybe I didn't know what we could be, but I knew we couldn't be a desert center. So as much as it made me a little nervous to say that, I had to put that in there. So this is sort of like that whole informed speculation I was talking about. You know, you've got to tell them the truth, no matter how painful it may be. I also recommended to them that we not have more than 3 thrust areas, because all of the really successful centers really narrowed down the number of thrust areas they had. I also said we had to have some solid funding up front, because again, the good centers were all built around some existing funding, like some big NSF grants. And then finally, I said they had to have some real relationships with regional stakeholders, like state and local government, NGOs, and the tribes. It couldn't just be lip service. They really had to work with them. And so this was put together in a Word document. The outcome of this was that they held a big convening with all the faculty in this ballroom. I actually remember it because I got to sit in the corner and watch it, right? And they used the document to drive discussion. So they used the document to get discussion going about what they wanted to do. And eventually they did establish a water initiative, and they decided to kind of flip the script and base it on water abundance. And they called it future H2O. And so I hope that just gives you some idea of how you can use the process, work through a task, and what it can be used for by your faculty or leadership. And now Alba, I'm going to turn it over to Alba, and she's going to talk about how you manage your project. Alba?
Thanks, Karen. So hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Alba McIntyre, Policy and Planning Analyst at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I will be going over some very light CI project management and highlight some strategies to keep your project on track and for you not to panic. Next slide, Karen. Okay, so let's start with understanding the quadruple constraints. Every project, not only CI project, any project, has constraints, and those are the time, scope, resources, and quality. You may have seen this picture, but instead of resources, you would have cost. We decided for resources because the cost for this kind of CI or strategic intelligence is absorbed by the university, but the availability of the resources is critical for functioning. So those constraints are actually interlinked. Once you impact one, decrease one, or increase another one, it will affect all of the other constraints. You may also have seen this as a triple constraint that lacks the quality in the center, but it is the concept is the same. When I started doing CI, I had no idea, no concept of project management. Actually, I didn't know at that time that I would have to be the analyst and the project manager at the same time. But in our case, yes, we do have to do that. So what I did, I took a few short courses. I then had I was a consultant for some time, and I've learned then about project management. That really helped me keep things on track, get organized, and not suffer. I used to suffer this paralysis when I had to start a big project. I would like panic and say, oh, what I have to do. So the project management helped me calm down and organize the plan. So this is my overall suggestion, actually, is for you to learn some basics of project management and project management tools. Like Karen said, it is also important to set expectations early on and be transparent with your customer that you do have constraints. You have the time, the resources, the scope constraints to deal with. Next slide. Okay, let's understand why CI any CI analysis takes a long time. It seems like we are always explaining, to answer this kind of question, it's going to take some time. It's not just, I'm not just answering who, what, when, or where I can put some data on Excel and, filter some every other way and I have an answer. That is not the role of CI. So CI, you're trying to answer complex questions and actually give meaning to that information, give strategic insights, give forward-looking assessments. So as you go to the right on this picture here, you increase exponentially not only the information you have to have, but the time it takes to answer those questions. So more complex analysis will, of course, have demand more time. I am gonna go to the next slide, Karen. I'm gonna give some strategies for time management. I'm gonna talk about the time, the scope, and the resources. So now regarding time management, I separated some strategies by the stages that Karen talked about. So we're going to go by stage. Now, these are strategies that I put in place for myself that I came across and I was stuck some way or another, but you should adapt or you should come up with strategies that fit your job. So for the planning stage, like Karen said, you have to be organized. You go organized for a first meeting, for a first interaction with your customer. Have that checklist so you don't forget anything to ask the customer right away. And that is, what is the main question? What type of, who is your stakeholder? Is it faculty? Is it administration? What sources do I have? And what are the expectable deliverables? Whenever possible, do make use of the human intelligence, because this will save you a lot of time of digging through data, and with the advantage that you already have this information verified by your expert. So on the planning stage, what the key word, the key theme here is organization. For the data collection and analysis, limit the data collection to your familiar sources. You're trying to answer complex questions and you're going to come up with other sources of information. But if you're short on time, you cannot learn the ins and outs of a new source of information because that will take too much time. So also triage key analysis to limit to answer a question and answer that question in a more focused, satisfactory answer. So the theme for data collection and analysis is actually efficiency. You need to be efficient and disciplined to get this data collection that really matters to answer the question. Next slide, Karen. For the transformation and dissemination is just don't complicate. It's very easy to start writing a long answer or a long narrative to avoid that at all costs. One, like Karen said, nobody reads a long report, and always have that key takeaways at the beginning of your report or presentation. I don't do reports anymore. I used to write long reports, pages and pages and pages, and I thought that was cool. But then I found out that nobody read because I made a critical mistake in one of my reports and nobody brought it up. And I was like, oh my God, so nobody reads this. From now on, I just started doing PowerPoint presentations. If they need the slide, they already have it in there. Focus on one message per question and make sure that the message is directly related to that question. You may want to say, explore a little bit more, but if you are short of time, do not do that. Keep it simple. Why did okay. Keep it simple. Next slide, please. My favorite topic, scope creep. So I think we all experience this, is scope creep. So what is scope creep? Scope creep are changes or expansion on the project, or the scope of the project, sorry, once you already have started that project. And it is the easiest way to derail a project is scope creep, because it's not just you're not managing yourself. It is something that comes from the customer. So what are the causes of scope creep? Not defining the scope clearly to begin with. Poor project management, there you are. You have to be the analyst and the project manager. And lack of communication with the customer. So this is, I came up with strategies that fit my needs. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. Karen. All right. So like I said, this is something that worked for me and that I started doing because I suffered several setbacks with scope creep. And then I thought, that has to work better for me. So the way I manage this is I never committed right away to a project. I asked for a couple of days. Give me a couple of days to think about this and I'll come back to you. In the meantime, on those couple of days, I would collect some basic intelligence about the topic. Let's say it's quantum, right? Everybody wants to know everything about quantum. So I would go back and look at what is already available out there. You don't need to do any deep research for this, or if you can use AI. You go and you look what it like broadly. What are we talking about quantum? Is it quantum material? Is it quantum sensors? Is it quantum, computing, etc.? With that basic information, I would go back to the customer and try to elicit more information about the scope. What you're doing here is, one, you're setting the parameters for your project and you're setting expectations for your project. So once I talk to the customer and we delineated a scope, and what I'm saying by scope here, it can be concepts, it can be keywords. I normally work with keywords, and in such a way that is a good number for you. It's not 1, but not 20. Both the extremes are problematic. For me, what always worked well was 10 keywords. And once I have that established with the customer, I would then send an informal agreement to the customer, it can be an email, with what is in scope, what is out of scope, the timeline and the resources that I would use to do that. So let's say you already started the project and the customer comes and said, no, we're going to need to include quantum networks in our analysis. Treat that as another project. It is strategically, it's better for you to start one project, even if it's limited in scope, and finish it, then go back and restart with a broader scope. So reset that automatically. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about the resources needed to do CI. Resources that I'm talking about here can be the analyst availability databases, internal and external, publication database, for example, commercial research analytics tools, and human intelligence. Now, to me, it's my opinion that your internal databases, like proposals, awards, research expenditures, and others, is what truly is important for CI. This is where you're going to see recent activity. You can assess your strengths and weaknesses, and where it's your differentiator of the information is this internal database. So let's see how we deal with internal databases that are less than ideal. One thing I want to make sure is, and this is a suggestion even before you establish a CI unit or you start this route or research intelligence, make sure you do a complete inventory of what you have available. Do you have proposal data available to awards, research expenditures? Do you have administrative permission to access this data? Is the data up to date? What fields do you have, etc.? Because if you go blindly into a CI project or any other major project and you don't have the access to that, you are in for a deep, deep problem. So let's say that you do have all access to your internal sources, but you're still short on time. You stick to familiar sources. I don't know, but it has been my case that I always ended up with several sets of data from proposals, awards, expenditures, the hard data, and none of them make sense. And I spend a lot of time trying to reconcile that data, and it never made sense. So avoid that at all costs. Stick to the one that everybody uses. I had a project where I had all that data in front of me and I was supposed to make sense of them. And I basically gave up. I said, it's impossible. There is no way I can do this. So avoid dealing with data that is conflicting because they are actually measuring different things. So avoid that. Tie the possible data limitation to the questions that you have, that you're asked, and to the answers provided. That can be, I always had this, an introduction of reports or my PowerPoint presentations. I had a statement, basically a disclaimer that what I was presenting was limited to the access of the data. And make sure that the customer is aware of the resource limitation, so he doesn't come, or he or she come asking you for why I have this answer. You have that answer because it was the only source that I could access, or I didn't have time to access any other sources. So basically, what I want to come up to you here is your project will not derail if you follow mandates of project management. And to me, what it did to me was to ease my mind on when I saw complex projects in front of me. If I had the project management mandates and tools, I would calm down to then start effectively doing the project. So this is it for me. I'll pass to Karen again.
Okay, so that brings us to our summary. And I just want to kind of go over what we talked about a little bit. You know, primarily that with CI, we're looking at typically some complex questions that need to be answered. You know, that's going to bring together a lot of different sources of information. We do want to make sure that what we're providing our stakeholders with is actionable. And by having that process, we're able to, you know, do something in a much more efficient and reliable way. As Alba just pointed out, we have to kind of be not only CI analysts, but CI project managers and balance a lot of different issues all at one time. And we hope that, by providing this presentation that, we brought up maybe some common issues and things that maybe are coming up and giving you some ideas for, how to handle those things. And I think with that, we're done with the presentation, and be happy to stop sharing now and just take some questions. So please feel free to come off mute. The dreaded CI silence.
Hi, Ryan here.
Hey, Ryan.
How's everyone doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. I really appreciated the scope creep section, and I mean, it is such a unanticipated human interaction oftentimes. What have you found to be maybe like disarming questions or ways to walk back and get into a space where expectations can be managed into a realistic deliverable or product at the end?
Karen, do you want to answer your experience, or do you want me to answer?
Yeah, well, I mean, for my part, I just try to really manage it up front and say, what I kind of like do that limitation, like what is the main thing you really need to have answered? I mean, Alba and I operate a little bit differently, which is fine. I think Alba, does that sort of contract up front, which is probably really smart, to do your due diligence and figure stuff out. I just, in the planning session, really just listen and kind of try to narrow down their question as much as possible, and not, I don't want them to have like 5 key questions, 2 or 3 at most. And when I hear a key question that is sort of ambiguous, I really work on getting that, like, well, do you mean this? Do you mean, so just trying to get them to be very specific and focused about what they want. And then also, you have people come back later on and say, oh, can you add this to it? Can you add this to it? And like Alba says, I'll say, well, we can do another project after we finish the first one. Just always tell them it's another project.
I had situations when I was right at the beginning when I was starting CI, where I was very accommodating to the customer, and I would keep adding things as they came back and said, oh yeah, let's add quantum network. Oh, okay, yeah. I was afraid of saying no. But that didn't help me, because you had to basically restart the project, and in their mind, it's still the same project with
Right.
still the same timeline, but not for you. They that's why I say I like to have this little contract determining the parameters of what are we gonna do. If for me personally, I work better if I have a plan and I finish that. It makes me feel better. And then I started, well, have to say no. I'm gonna have to push back on this with the customer and say, I can't do this. We're gonna finish this, see how it goes, and then if needed be, we're gonna start another project with another set of parameters. Start again.
Lisa, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, because everything that you've said has really resonated with me, and also has really helped validate some of the experiences I've had because I think we share a lot in common with the kinds of pitfalls and things to avoid. So I appreciate the advice. I'm thinking a lot about reporting right now, and my ability to convey the actionable insights and the recommendations, and to sequence everything into kind of a story that people will consume, given that they don't have a lot of time. And I've tried different approaches like you guys have with the long reports and then shorter reports, executive summary, PowerPoint, even did podcasts. I was even joking yesterday that I was going to do a graphic, like a comic book approach. But I just would like your advice on that piece, and maybe the role of data storytelling and the use of visualizations, and any advice you have on trying to get those reports consumed by the right people.
It's a hard one.
I tried several things too. The long reports were nice for me, but not nice to the customer, because they don't read. They really do not care. Most of the time they check a box. Yeah, there is a report, blah, blah, blah. They read the first 2 pages and that's it. So then I started doing PowerPoint presentations. Sometimes it can get long, very 40, 50 slides. What I do then is I structure the PowerPoint presentation in sections. Each section has an executive summary for that section. For example, let's say I'm doing right now, I'm evaluating how we can engage with industry and chemistry. So I do an analysis of the chemistry department, what is their current engagement with industry. So that is one section. There is an initial slide on key takeaways. Okay, then comes the rest. They can skip that part. Then I have another section on companies we are already engaging with. Then I had literally you structure like a little book, the PowerPoint presentation, and they can skip to the key takeaways of each section. I got to a point also where I built battle cards. I was analyzing several areas in a broad aerospace science, several subtopics. So I built battle cards for each subtopic. So basically the administration could put those battle cards in front of them and see which ones we had capacity, which ones were lacking, I settled with the PowerPoint presentation finally, because the battle cards were nice, but the reports, I'm just totally over it.
Yeah,
Karen.
I think a big part is just understanding that communication preference, because I do think with what Alba said, that the big reports are dead. They're completely dead. The only way you can send something report style is to fractionate it and just put in sections and keep any narrative as lean as possible, right? So a lot of times I'm combining a lot of visualizations with narrative, but it's lean, right? And it's all sectioned. So making sure that if somebody just wants to read about this one part, this one thing that we looked at, okay, they can find it easily. Putting an index is a great idea. There have been times where we've hyperlinked indexes, you can do things like that. I also do a lot of hyperlinking in reports. I know some people are like, oh, you should put everything you know, like you would in a publication. And it's like nobody is going to take the time to go look up all those sources. But if you hyperlink it, they will go right to everything. So I just hyperlink stuff. If there's a source we used, hyperlink it and they can find it easily. And yeah, just putting everything right up front. And a lot of times when I send the email, I'll just take those key findings and put them right in the email, you know? So it's like, the funny thing is occasionally though, you know, some people are such data heads that if I put all of the data in an appendix, I'll have somebody every once in a while say, oh, what was going on with, you know, table 15 in, well, I'm like, really? You're looking at stuff buried in the appendix? So you just never know. People are all different. Some have some time on their hands, but you know, most of the higher ups do not have any time. So
one thing, we are at the end here, but one thing that someone is coming in now. One thing that I've learned to do also is a sort of next steps or playbook. So you don't just give the key takeaways. You say, well, because you ultimately seeing all the data, you're familiar with the information, you contextualize the information, etc. So it's like Karen said, have confidence in what you've learned and pass that information forward. Actually, that is your job, is to help them come up with decisions, right? Or with a plan or some strategy. So I like to give like a playbook. What if we're going to do next? For example, sometimes they're trying to collaborate with industry. Buddy, there is no way industry is going to collaborate with you here. It would be better off, you know, targeting Department of Defense or Department of Energy. So I give that sort of suggestions, next steps, at the end of my executive summary. So because they may read the executive summary and they like, so what do I do with this? Well, read the next section. You learn.
well,
right.
I know we're over time, and I want to respect everybody's time, but thanks everybody for attending and for your questions. And like I said, we'll get the recording out as soon as we can. And yeah, we'll have another event coming up, hopefully in November, and I hope to see you there. So thanks so much, guys.